On this episode, we talk with Greg Wiens about how leaders can lean into their own unique wiring. Well, hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast. I am your host, Kendall Connor, and our goal with this podcast is really just to have conversations that empower healthy churches. Listen, we have a great one for you today. Joining me is Greg Wiens from Healthy Growing Leaders. This is an organization that helps to engage leaders towards health and impact. Greg has been creating resources and assessing leaders and organizations for over 40 years now. He has worked in organizations that range in size from Fortune 100 companies to public schools to nonprofits and even churches. It's pretty amazing. His forte is leadership. His passion is helping leaders to be healthy by understanding their unique wiring and functioning in their true calling. Greg has pastored and been involved in starting churches and organizations, but I think what truly makes him unique is that he has developed over 40 different assessments, these tools, instruments that help organizations. He's helped organizations such as Exponential, World Vision, and many other churches and organizations around the world. His spiritual gifts test has helped more than 50,000 people over the last 5 years to better understand their strengths in ministry. There are currently 5 different denominations that are using his True Wiring Suite to help pastoral candidates better understand who they are and embrace their own unique wiring as they're figuring out their calling. He has authored and co-authored 4 different books, consulted leaders in 16 different countries. You can tell that this is just going to be a great conversation and a great listen for any leader who is serving in ministry. And so I want to get out of the way and I want to jump straight into this conversation today with Greg Wiens. Well, hey there, Greg. Thanks so much for being on here with us today.
Thank you, Kendall. It's my privilege. You know that. I enjoy this.
Yeah, this is going to be awesome. I'm really excited to jump in. I was curious, we just read off your public bio and your intro, but I'd love to know, is there anything that maybe doesn't make that public bio that we need to know about? Maybe something all your friends and family know about you?
Well, probably the interesting thing is I always, when I left General Motors, went to seminary, I was on staff at this large church, I thought I was God's gift to the church. I really did. And we daughtered a church and it exploded and did so very well. And so when I planted, I thought I was God's gift to the kingdom. And probably the most significant thing to understand about me and my heart and my ministry is that God took me through a 14-year period of just breaking me.
Wow.
Where at the end of that process, I wouldn't wish it on my own worst enemy, but to be very honest with you, I kind of like what it did to me. In fact, it was interesting. At one point in this breaking period, I had a church that literally called me as mega church that I had been mentored by his previous pastor. Yeah. And the guy, the elder chair said to me, we'd like you to consider being our next lead pastor. And I said, well, let me pray about it. So after a week, he called me back. I said, no, I just don't see it. And he said, we have more staff than you have people in your body. Why would you say no? And I said, this breaking time has been so hard for me. But the very fact that I can tell you no is a result of what God's done in me through this process. And it totally rewired me. And that's kind of an initial process.
Well, and that's you've told us so much about your journey just in that, is there anything that you would say as a part of your journey that has really just helped you and to get to the point where you're helping so many different people understand their unique wiring?
Well, yeah, I think part of it is coming to grips with my own wiring in that process.
Yeah.
The reality was, I had through that breaking, I had to give up all my aspirations. You always wanted to be like, you can name the person, we all have these models or people, authors we admire, we want to be like them. And it was only through that breaking time did I come to see that, no, God's wired me to be just Greg and nobody else. And as I became I mean, it was funny because I can remember my mom when I was a little kid. She grabbed me by my earlobes and she said, "Gregory, don't." I knew I was in trouble when she said Gregory, but Gregory, don't you dare start something until you finish it. Do you understand? Stop starting things. And so I grew up thinking I was a bad person for loving starting things. And even in my discipleship, my mentors had always been these stable, steady guys. And so for me, it was after in this breaking time, I came to realize that I'm really good at starting things. And so I need to surround myself with people who are really good at finishing what I start. And I need to give it away and have a little ownership. And so it was that whole thing of coming to grips with who I am and how to manage that, what I call hardware part of me. That's never going to change. That has really freed me up now to do what I do. And for the most part, not worry about who gets credit.
No, I love that. And tell us a little bit about healthy growing leaders and how you're able to help people with that now. Well,
it's interesting because I'll figure out what I want to do when I grow up. I'm 70. I haven't quite figured that out yet. But, having engineering background and then I went into seminary, went to pastorate and became a pastor at a small, medium, large church. And then getting a PhD and going back and teaching at the university level.
Wow.
I have all these backgrounds and, for me, it was God, how in the world, I mean, someone from the outside would look at it and just say, he just can't figure out what he wants to do. Now, in hindsight, looking back, God was he was weaving some very unique threads in my life together in a way that today, Healthy Growing Leaders for the last 15 years is an organization that is really committed to engaging leaders in their true calling and helping them be healthy and impactful.
It's amazing.
My personal life is a story, and Kendall, I'll share a little bit with you that, as I said, I was trying to be somebody that I really wasn't wired to be. And so once I gave up on trying to be who I wasn't, but rather to be who God intended me, and I was able to fulfill his true calling, which for us is coming beside leaders. We have a battery of assessments that I've created simply because of some of that background I mentioned. I have the capacity and the skills to develop instruments. So I developed instruments as well as I assess people based on those instruments and I debrief them on those instruments. We then help develop a plan for helping them live into their true calling. So that's, Healthy Growing Leaders is a little bit of general organization, but we do specifically create assessments for people as well as we assess, debrief, and then develop plans for specific leaders. So
and that's amazing. And I don't want to go by this without touching on it. So you have a background not only in pastoring and helping leaders, but you also spent time. Did you say GM that you worked with?
Yeah,
with GM
I was an engineer for General Motors. Yes.
Wow. So, I mean, you're approaching things a little bit differently than some people who are working in this space, right? You're coming at it almost like an engineer in a way.
Yeah. And I was in what's called an industrial engineer educationally. That's what my degree was in from the University of Michigan. And then, so I engineered people. But yet you still have to take all the calculus and physics and thermodynamics and all those courses. So that was part of it for me was, they said, in high school, Greg, you're really good in math and sciences. You should be an engineer. I had no clue what an engineer did. I thought they shoveled coal on a train, so I had no clue. But as I went to university, then I found out that, I was good at those things. But really, I enjoy people. And so that's why it was, even I didn't understand that early in my educational. So I ended up getting an engineering degree and then worked on my MBA and then, the MDiv and then, as I'm getting all these things, and it didn't come together really. In fact, it's an interesting thing for me that as I studied Paul, the apostle, he had about 35 years of ministry, came to Christ 28, somewhere in there, mid to late 20s, and then was killed somewhere in early to mid 60s. So he had about 35-year ministry. But yet it's his last decade. He was so much more impactful than the previous 25 years.
Wow.
You see, and we don't look at it that way. Chronologically, you can study it. I'll spare you all the details, but it's just amazing to see the impact he had the last 10 years versus the previous 25. And yet in ministry, we think if we haven't hit our stride by the time we're 40, we're washed up.
Wow.
That if we haven't written the book or had the large church or whatever it may be. And yet, in fact, Clinton first did this in The Making of a Leader, Bobby Clinton, his research. But if you continue to study, it is amazing how in the kingdom, if you really are growing in your own calling and your own understanding and your own maturity in Christ, your last decade of ministry should be your most significant.
Wow. What a word for our listeners today, right? Who may be in that exact season. That's so encouraging. I want to ask you this. We talk about understanding your own unique wiring and what God has called you specifically to do. How important is it for ministry leaders to really understand what makes them unique?
Well, I use the example, and it's not unique with me, but it is. If I ask you to sign your name with your dominant hand, you sign it in 2.5 seconds, and it looks good. Or some people it's better than others, but nonetheless, it's a decent signature. If I tell you to put it in your non-dominant hand and sign your name, we all know the results. It's scribbly. It's hard to read it. It takes about 2.5 times longer.
Sure.
Well, and I talk about in ministry, so many people are trying to do ministry in their non-dominant hand. Now, can they do it? Yeah, they could do it.
Right.
Just like you can sign your name with your non-dominant hand. But it's so much easier. The fruit is so much more beautiful if you do it in your natural way. And so that's, for me, it's understanding your wiring. I mean, I don't care, choose any biblical character and you see how when God allowed them to operate within their own unique, natural, and gifted way, that's when the ministry flourished. It doesn't mean that they got famous and big. Things that we attribute to success today. But they really were fruitful for the kingdom. Sure. When they're operating on their natural gifts and the way God had wired them, both what I call hardware and software. So,
no, that's so good, and it makes a lot of sense. And I remember as we connected the other day, you talked a little bit about what you just said, the hardware and the software. Can you elaborate on that a little bit and tell us how that really applies for these leaders who are listening? Yeah,
and I think for me it comes out of Psalm 139, and Ephesians 2:8, 9, 10.
Okay.
So I'll allude to those as we go through here. But, it's intriguing to me that David says we're fearfully and wonderfully made. And, we think, of course, David, he was king and, he would play the harp, he killed lions. Of course, he could say that about himself. But the reality is I've done thousands of debriefs with leaders and everyone is fearfully and wonderfully made. And it is so unique. And the reason I think they're unique is because in that passage, David says, "You formed me while yet in my mother's womb." And I believe there are certain attributes of you, Kendall, and for me and everybody listening, that they're lifelong. As I just mentioned about me, my mom was shaking me when I was a young kid about not starting things. I've always been a starter. Well, that's kind of what I call hardware. And God has wired me that way. And just as he's wired other people to be nurturing or other people to be detail-oriented, precise, and follow systems, there's some unique. I have 3 kids. All of them came out of the womb different, And,
I have 3 boys as well, and they're completely different.
Yeah,
they look alike, right? But they couldn't be more different in the way that they act.
And that's the hardware. So David says that you formed me while you're in my mother's womb. But in the same passage, he continues and says, "And yet all the days of my life were written in your book before one of them took place." And for me, that's the software. To me, that's the life events, the family of origin, the scripting and the sculpting, that God used all those events in our life to script and sculpt us in a very, very unique way. And that's what I call software. And the reason I call that software is because it's the difference between hardware and software is hardware you don't change. If I want to change the hardware on my phone, I actually get a new phone.
Right.
But software, I change my software, as I'm sure you do, on your phone every few weeks. They have a new update coming.
Right.
And it's that way. You see, we don't change our hardware. And so it's really important for us to understand our hardware. But often the way we're fiercely wonderfully made is because there is nobody, Kendall, who has your hardware, certain lifelong attributes, and has gone through all the events, the scripting and sculpting that you've gone through. And as you look at those 2 things together and how they play together, there's nobody in this world that has those things. And so some of the instruments we use are hardware. They talk about your hardware. Some of the instruments are software, like emotional intelligence is a software issue. Conflict, how do you handle conflict? Your motivators. Those are all kind of more formed around some of our life events and significant emotional experiences. So that's what I call software. And for me, it's interesting. I think that's why Ephesians 2:8, 9, we know that for it is by grace you've been saved. We know that passage very, very well.
Right.
But the paragraph is actually verse 10 is included in that. And we've come into this unique relationship with our Lord and Savior, Ephesians 2:8 and 9, by grace through faith. so that for you are God's workmanship, created to do good works. I mean, his masterpiece, it's translated in some versions. It's really a one-of-a-kind poem, that you're a one-of-a-kind poem for which he has designed good works for only you to do. And so that's, to me, the key thing is that, all the hardware and the software work together. As we come into that relationship with Christ, we're then able to do some things that no one else in this world can do. And so that's
amazing.
Part of what we do is help people figure out what's that unique thing that God's called you to do. It may not be what you had always aspired. It was that very, very, very much away from me. I mean, I always thought I was going to lead a large church. God had other plans. I never did. I was on staff in a very large church, but I didn't lead it. And so what I realized through the breaking and those other kind of things is God called me to have a large impact. Which is radically different than leading a large church. And so you have to kind of get out of the way sometimes to understand the unique calling, the true calling. And that's kind of what the breaking did for me. It kind of forced me to have to face some things where through my pride and aspirations, so I was trying to be somebody that I wasn't.
Well, and I think that's such a word for the people who are listening today, because, I know, especially if you're the type of person who is seeking to be a better leader, you're listening to podcasts, you're reading books, and you see these leaders, and we just view them sometimes as, oh, they have it all together. Or if I could just be like that pastor, or if I could be like that leader, then I will finally have arrived. But really, I think what you're saying is, when we're at our best, when we're being who God has called us to uniquely be, and we can only we can be, ourselves, right?
That's right. And, Eugene Peterson wrote the book, A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. And to me, your call is that kind of a journey. It's a long obedience in the same direction. If it's true what I said, that our most effective decade is our last decade, then it's being faithful in the little steps along the way.
Yes.
The sad thing for me is so many pastors and leaders get frustrated that their last decade is either waiting for retirement, going to play golf, they have moral failure, flame outs. I mean, we know all the reasons, but people jettison out of ministry. And to be honest with you, I don't see any retirement in Scripture except death. I mean, obviously, I think, someday I'll kind of kick back. But the reality is the kingdom work never ends. And that should be our kind of our call is that. So, it's for me, it's interesting to see how the hardware, software informs your call. They don't determine your call. But once you understand your uniqueness of both hardware and software, it does inform. I mean, it is interesting. Paul was a catalytic, dynamic leader before he came to Christ. I mean, he was out killing Christians and everything else.
Right.
So God didn't change his personality. God just reworked it. And so he used his uniqueness. And ironically, he was raised in a Greek culture. That was the software. God used that very attribute of him to take the gospel as an apostle to the Greeks. Anyways.
Greg, this conversation, as you mentioned, Paul, is right on time for me. I'm right in the middle of leading a men's small group on Tuesday mornings for our church, and we've been talking about the life of Paul. So I'm just nodding along, and I'm just eating all of this up because it's right on time for me.
Well, and I think it's funny. Paul's a great example, but he comes to Christ and road to Damascus and all that experience. He goes back to Jerusalem in Acts 9. I mean, he becomes a basket case. They lower him out of the road, of the wall of Damascus, out of a basket. And he gets back to Jerusalem. There is, and he gets to Jerusalem. And this is an interesting thing that we often miss. In Jerusalem, he is not a success. He is a failure. In fact, so much so they send him back to Tarsus. And the interesting thing for me is Luke records in Acts 9 that after they sent him back to Tarsus, basically, go home, Paul. We'll contact you. Don't call us. They send him home. We're told the church experienced the presence of the Holy Spirit. It grew in numbers and in impact. That's after they sent him home. And we don't hear anything from Paul until the middle of Acts 11. Where all of a sudden now the gospel's in the reaching in Antioch and it's reading Gentiles. And that's when Barnabas says, oh yeah, remember that guy named Paul? And he goes to Tarsus and he finds Paul. But I think it's really intriguing. You talk about breaking, Paul was the star. He was the number one draft, so to speak. And when he came to Christ, you would have thought he would have been automatically made the starting quarterback. But he doesn't. He gets sent and he goes through scholars debate whether it's a 3 year to 10 years, somewhere between 3 and 10 years. He's stuck there in Tarsus. And God's, I think we don't know exactly because it's a quiet time, but I think God's kind of breaking Paul of some of that stuff.
Wow.
Anyways.
No, that's awesome. And I can't wait to talk more about this with my small group next week. That's awesome. So that was an extra nugget that I wasn't planning on today getting. So that was great. The next question that I want to ask you about is just, I know that you've developed, I think your bio said over 40 different assessments and tests and things like that. Could you share a little bit about what those look like and how they help leaders?
Yeah, a lot of them, people will hire. I mean, I have kind of a unique niche in that I have this, 20 years of ministry experience, more than that, but ministry experience. And then I have this psychometric engineering kind of background too. So I can meld the two. So I did four assessments for Exponential. Many people are familiar with Exponential. And so if you've taken any of their becoming a leader, level 5 discipler, level 5 congregation, those were all developed by me. I did a couple for World Vision. They were struggling at how do we help churches understand how do we make disciples, but also reach the least of these. So I developed a couple assessments for them for churches to take. And ECO, some denominations that I've worked with that developed assessments for them. So people hired me to do that. But I also have developed a battery of assessments that, for me, they're for the kingdom. And one's called True Wiring. It's 4 instruments. Well, first of all, I have a spiritual gift instrument that's it's out there free. It's in a lot of work. I mean, we've had, I think, 50,000 people take it in the last 4 or 5 years. So it's very commonly used spiritual gift instrument. Yeah, it's fun. But the True Wiring involves basically a behavioral assessment, which is DISC. We use DISC, which a motivational, which drivers, internal drivers, which is what we call motivators. And the reason DISC is a great instrument, but it's a bad instrument. It's a great instrument because everybody can understand the 4, the D, and the I, and the S and C, but it's bad because they get labeled as I don't care what's an Enneagram, 9. God is much more creative than to create 9 kinds of people. I mean, let's be real. Or 18 if you call wings, or 27 with double wings. I don't care. God's really creative. So I'm always uncomfortable with one instrument determining who you are. So we have DISC, and you can have a person who's a DI, for instance, on the DISC, but have different motivators, and they act radically different than them from each other. So it's DISC, it's motivators, the drivers. What's driving that DI behavior? Then it's EQ, it's emotional intelligence. And then it's an impact is more about EQ than it is IQ. I know we think that people follow us because of what we know. It's more of how you're investing yourself in them emotionally. So it's EQ. And then the last one is conflict profile. How do you handle conflict? And Jesus handled it 5 ways. We look in the New Testament, so we assess 5 different ways of handling conflict. And no one's right all the time. Jesus used all 5.
Wow.
But so we use those 4 instruments plus the spiritual gift, but we use those 4 instruments primarily to get 4 snapshots of you because no one instrument is an F. So, and then we use other instruments as well, that I've developed. We have a trust factor instrument that will be coming out soon. Spiritual formation instrument that I worked with North Point. It's called SFI, and it's a very elaborate looking at discipleship. I think I've developed about 8 different discipleship instruments for churches and organizations over the years. I mean, obviously, as churches and organizations, we're always concerned about measuring discipleship, but that's a hard handle to get a hold of. Measuring discipleship, and each church or each denomination has a little different perspective on because of their theological bent, so they want to measure it in a little different way. So those are some of the instruments.
Do you find, and it's incredible to hear the different ones that you've come up with and worked on. I'm curious. Do you find that it's most beneficial to the leaders, or is it more something that they are getting their volunteers or staff members or things like that, or is it beneficial for both?
Yes, I think it's both. What we have discovered is if you don't know yourself, you can't help other people know themselves. Sure. People try it all the time, by the way, but it's not real effective long term. So the first thing is, understand yourself, understand how how these instruments apply to you and how they inform your own sense of call. But this, everyone is called. It's not just those who have the title pastor or reverend or whatever, but everyone is called. And so much of what we do is help everyone understand. For instance, a small group leader. I've led groups for 50 years. And literally, almost without exception, when I start a small group, one of the first things we do the first few weeks is take spiritual gift test. Mm-hmm. Because
I haven't heard that to do the spiritual gift test inside the small group, just to learn.
Well, one for me is like, why not? If we have some people with gift of hospitality, what in the world am I planning? The hospitality kind of issue. Let them plan it, or
Sure.
just find out where people are gifted. Let the group function. Not sage on the stage. I'm going to teach you, but let the group function and minister to each other based on their own gifts.
Wow.
And the interesting thing about all of our instruments, including our spiritual gift, is they're what we call norm referenced, meaning if you score a score, it isn't just that was the highest score for you, if it's your highest score, but it's your scores compared to, at this point, thousands of other Christians around the nation. So they're all norm referenced. And so, because for instance, people often are surprised their evangelism gift is where it is because they think, well, I don't have that gift. But when you compare their evangelism gift to the evangelism gift of everybody else, it does appear it's a much higher gift than other people based on what we call norm referencing. So it's not just raw scores added up, but they're actually your scores are compared to thousands of others before you get your results. So,
wow, no, that's really interesting. I want to ask you about this, and you touched on it. Emotional intelligence. It's kind of a buzzword in leadership circles. How do you help leaders develop their EQ, and why is that important as they're leading?
Yeah, it's intriguing. See, I grew up in a German household. EQ is software. What we know about EQ is that one, it's formed for most of us in our family of origin, for good or bad. And the other thing is it's very dynamic. You can change because they're just skill sets you can learn. I'll get to that in a moment. But for me, I grew up in a German household, and we weren't allowed to do emotions. I remember one day having a bad day, and my dad telling me, "Go run around the house 3 times, you'll feel better." I mean, that's how we dealt with emotions in our house. And I was an active, kind of person, so EQ wasn't that important for me. But yet, my first mentor in my 20s said to me, shortly after I had come to Christ, "Greg, let's work on helping develop some of these skills." He didn't call it EQ because we hadn't created EQ yet, but that's what it was.
Right.
It was learning to be aware of what emotions I was experiencing and being able to read what other people are experiencing and know how to understand their emotions and how to help them as they understand their own emotions, be able to articulate and express those emotions. And so we can get out. And because my observation is most people know a whole lot more than they're able to do in the church.
Wow.
But they don't understand the emotional impediments to actually applying what they cognitively know, what they already know.
Wow.
People don't know scripture. So EQ is all about knowing what's going on inside of you and being able to, at any moment, say, for instance, I'm a little anxious here right now. I can tell you that. I know there's a little anxiety in me, and we had a little technological problem. We started here. And so I feel that anxiety down here in my gut. Well, EQ is to know when are your emotions at work and how are they impacting what you say and what you do and your perspective. And that's being able to do that with other people. Now, different EQ tests have a bunch of different scales, but that's basically it. How aware are you in real time?
Right.
And you can see as a pastor, if you're not aware of your own emotions, and I hate to say this, but research shows that pastors are often lower in EQ than other professions.
Wow.
On themselves, they tend to be higher on other people. They're really good. Wow. Pastors are generally really good at knowing other people's emotions, but they're not really good at understanding their own.
Wow.
So it gets them in trouble. I think, if I have a good friend of a large church and had a moral failure, and he told me I was having a quiet time every day. I was, doing all this stuff. What I didn't realize was emotionally inside, I was rotting. And I never was in touch with this emotional stuff until it snapped. And I had this affair and, So,
wow.
I think so often it's very important because so often our EQ can subvert our call in some very unhealthy ways if we're not aware of it.
Wow. So definitely important to realize what's going on inside you and your own emotions as you're leading other people. Wow. I know that you talked a little bit about this, but you spend a lot of time helping creating pathways and procedures to help develop leaders and to develop disciples. What would you say are just some practical ways that church leaders can invest in their own growth to become a better follower of Jesus as they're serving in ministry?
I want to answer that, but I first realized, I just remembered, I didn't answer your previous question. So let me go back.
Let's not miss that.
You said, how do I help people develop their EQ? I talked about what it is and why it's important. I didn't necessarily say how you develop it. As I mentioned, there's skills. And as you develop any skills, you develop skills by practicing and having someone observe you and giving you feedback. I mean, if you want to ride a bike, you got to get on a bike and try it. You want to learn EQ, you have to have someone who's you're able to say, okay, and you journal. For me, journaling was very helpful, but this is what I experienced today. This is what I felt or I didn't feel, whatever. And you get feedback from someone who's able to observe you in real time, coach you, if you will, in real time, someone who is really good at EQ. And you have them coach you, say, did you notice this? Well, no, I didn't.
Wow.
Well, how would you notice that next? So it's that kind of role playing. It's that kind of coaching. So that's how so it's not just reading a book. Reading a book can help, but it's also in real time helping a person develop the skills necessary. So I want to say that.
No, that's definitely really helpful for sure.
So back to would you restate the question on the discipleship? I apologize.
Yeah, I know that you've spent a lot of time helping to create procedures and pathways that people can help to become a better leader, to become a better disciple. I'm curious, are there any practical tips, any practical ways that the leaders that are listening to this today can just invest in their own growth?
Yeah, I think let me draw a distinction, because the question I heard was disciples and leaders. And I think in the church today, I think it's a misnomer, but we think disciples are made, and then at some point, then a leader is made. That leaders are just extensions of discipleship. And I would disagree with that, because I see leadership biblically being gifts and not developmental. I mean, we do developmental leaders, but I think that discipleship is an independent scale of leadership. So let's just say that I think that, and that's very important, because I don't think in a lot of churches we see that. We think we disciple people and they really become mature, then they all of a sudden emerge as leaders. I don't see that in Scripture. I see we're all called to be mature disciples, and some will lead, as we know. So, I think see those two as separate. For me, the part and the process is the same in developing disciples and or leaders. It's first helping them understand where they are, getting a snapshot, a picture of where they are. However, we have assessments that do that, but it can be done with just feedback. But giving someone a picture of where they are. When they understand where they are, it helps them understand where they need to go, where they need to develop. And then they understand where they need to develop, it's then developing a plan specifically designed for them to help them get there. For instance, I'll choose myself as an example, or me as an example. When this mentor realized I didn't have spiritual gifts, we talked about it, and he gave several examples where he had seen me not operate in some not healthy ways in emotional intelligence. So in his coaching then, he said, why don't you begin journaling about these events? I'll watch you, and then we'll reflect back on how we're doing. So there was again, where was I? Where did I need to develop? And then a plan where he continued to coach me in that. Now, I think that works whether it's discipleship or leadership.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. I think that process works. The challenge with that, and to be very candid with you, it's very hard in a church of any size to do that individually.
Sure.
That's the problem. So what we do is we develop programs, albeit good programs, but we try to mass produce people through these programs with very little thought that we're not helping them individually deal with where they all are. We're trying to grow them in a greenhouse kind of thing.
Sure.
Everybody's going to grow at the same level. And yet in Scripture and in experience, I don't see that. So there lies the challenge. That's why I love about, by the way, small groups.
Yes.
Where there's intentionality, not just let's talk about the sermon Sunday, and then next semester we're going to all shape up. We're going to do a different group because we're going to get to new people. But let's create environments where we can help each other identify where each of us are, where we need to go, and then help us develop plans on how to get there.
Incredible. Yeah. So you're saying it's much more productive to spend, one-on-one, or if not one-on-one, at least in a small group, rather than, trying to, for lack of a better term, mass produce, right? A huge program for something like this. It's most productive on a single scale. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
In fact, I was speaking at a very large, it was exponential, and it was a bunch of people in this room, more than 100. And I did a little survey, and I just talked about, okay, I want you to identify for me what was the most important factor in your growth, spiritual growth. And these are, a lot of these are pastors of large churches, very large churches. And not a single one said sermons.
Wow.
It was always an individual, it was a small group, it was an environment. And I think life change occurs in the context of a close relationship. I really do.
Yes.
So, if that's what's going to happen, I'm not saying sermons aren't important. They are.
Yes.
We need to dedicate ourselves to the apostles' teachings. However, when we think and I know a number of pastors who think that's our discipleship ministry, as I sit underneath my teaching on Sunday morning or on the weekend services. Well,
yes.
There's a problem with that, I think.
It sounds like for those who are listening, or even myself, wanting to increase, wanting to find out more about my own, it sounds like really making sure that I have people in my life, finding that mentor, finding someone that I can go to is something that will help. If I'm trying to develop myself. Is that kind of what you're getting at there?
Very much so. And that's spoken from a guy who develops assessments, who develops instruments that you can go ahead and take, on yourself and get some numbers or get some graphs and all that stuff. Yeah. Those are only a snapshot from which real life change can occur.
Yes.
And that's why for us, assessment, we assess, we debrief, and we develop. It's all ADD. And that's very important. We do assess at the beginning. I think that's very important. But we don't, to just do the data down, that doesn't change people's lives. You don't develop leaders or disciples based on that. So the discipleship instruments that I developed, that I've worked on and continuing to work on right now, it's always to be done as a snapshot out of which you have a personal relationship with someone who helps you in that process.
No, that's great. And, we know how important relationships are, and just having somebody that, that you're being honest with and, can really call you out and challenge you is so important. I'm curious, for the leaders who are listening to this today, who just may feel stuck, they may feel unsure about their own unique wiring. What would you say is the first step that you would encourage them to do to just better understand who they are and the unique calling that God has put on them?
Well, I'm a little biased in that, but I think one of the best places to start is to get an accurate picture of who you are, your wiring. And as I said, there's a whole bunch of instruments out there. They can choose whatever instruments you want, but it's to get an accurate perspective. And one of the advantages of the true wiring suite is it's just not one instrument. I'm always uncomfortable when people say, I can give you a list of 45 instruments that I've taken, but I'm really uncomfortable when it's just one instrument, because there's one snapshot of you simply is not going to be appropriate. So I think it needs to be kind of what we call a constellation of instruments. But to get a snapshot of you, and then to have someone who can take those instruments and actually help you understand personally in your life. It's not just reading the scales or reading the reports, because that doesn't do much, but actually help you apply that in a meaningful way to your life. And those are often the difficult times. When I do debriefs with people, probably 30% of the time, maybe 40% of the time, there's tearing. You hear people cry, they tear up, because for the first time, someone's helped them grasp with something they struggled with for a long time, good or bad. I mean, either way. Yeah. So they're often emotional times, but there are times where there's a real visceral coming to grips with, this is who I'm wired to be. Yeah. And only then are they able to then be free to pursue God's call on their life. Again, there's kind of a shaking that has to take place to get us to leave where we've been to where we want to go. So
And just hearing that may be intimidating to somebody. How would you encourage people? Is this vital to do? Would you encourage them to press forward in this?
Well, and I would say only do so if you want to be effective and productive.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, that's the consequence. But there's a lot of people who in ministry, even pastors who just want to finish the race. As Paul says, I finished the race, but they don't understand that he finished it well. So for me, if you want to be effective, and again, I'm the worst of all sinners on this thing. I believe I am continuing to learn myself, learn about who I am and how the areas I need to develop. I read a blog, by the way, it's called Thursday Thoughts. And I thought, and I've written about this a lot, that I thought by the time I got to be 70, I'd have my life pretty well together. That is not true. That is not true. I'm still working on issues, some issues. So, in fact, my observation is the more mature I become in Christ, the more I'm aware of how far I have to go.
Wow.
So for me, it's a control. One of the scales that we use, that we have actually in instruments called the growth propensity scale, as part of the True Wiring Suite, talks about your willingness to learn and to grow, and that it's amazing. Just quickly, Carol DeWitt she wrote a book called Mindset, and in their book, she talks about she was an academic. She taught education at University of Columbia at the time, but Columbia University. But she took a bunch of elementary kids, and this would be interesting for your listeners to think about this in yourself. She took a bunch of kids and gave them a puzzle up to their maximum level they could accomplish, the maximum level of capacity. And when she got to that level, she would then give them a choice. Okay, I'm going to give you another puzzle. I can either give you one that's more difficult, you won't be able to do because it's beyond your ability, but you might learn something. Or I'm going to give you one that's going to be difficult, it'll be a challenge, but you'll be able to complete it and feel good about yourself. Which would you choose? Which one of these? And no surprise, kids fell into two camps, and big deal. What's the big deal about her research? Well, she followed those two groups for the next 20 years.
Wow.
And the elementary kids who chose the puzzle that they could not solve but were willing to learn, we call growth propensity scale in my instrument. Those kids ended up, ironically, faith is not a part of this book, but it's really interesting. They had higher incomes, healthier marriages, healthier relationships. You can go right down the list. Those who want to just perform well and look good, they had more divorces, it just went all the way down the list. Wow. Such a difference. Now, what we know is that skill like GPS, is just like EQ. You can learn that. You can learn to increase. So for me, for instance, when I first read this book, I realized I love learning relationally. So I had a very high growth propensity scale in relationships, but professionally, I wanted people to think I was really smart. And so I didn't put myself out there where I was going to look down. And that was and so I had to totally rewire myself professionally to say, oh no, there's a lot of stuff I don't know. Wow. But again, and so when I use that as an example, that I find that the people who have a high growth propensity scale, who are willing to look foolish to learn, often are the ones who are going to continue to grow throughout their ministry and career. Those who want to just do just okay enough and let people think they're okay and they're good enough.
Safe. Yeah.
Yeah. So sorry about that little.
No, this is really, really great stuff. I have a feeling how you'll answer this, but it's something that we ask to everybody who comes on the podcast is, in your opinion, what would you say is one essential component of a healthy church?
Yeah, for me, it's are people's lives being transformed?
Wow.
Are they being conformed to the image of Christ? I phrase it in a lot of cute ways, but, making more disciples of lost people. But, to me, it's about what direction are they headed? Are they headed toward Christ or not? I don't care. There's a lot of metrics we use in psychometrics and measuring things like, baptisms, butts in the pews, budgets, all those things. But there's a little principle called Goodhart's Law I should share at this point. I know we're going to run over it, but it's Goodhart's Law, which Goodhart's Law says this, and it's a psychometric principle. It says, when a measure, something that's really a good measure, becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
Wow.
So And think about that. So when in a church, what's a good measure? Attendance, baptism, all these things are really good measures. But when they become the target, they cease to be a good measure. So you asked me that why it's important is because, so what's the most important for the church? Well, it is, I believe it is making disciples. But how do you quantify that?
Yes.
And so doing, you can't make that measure a target, because when it becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
Wow, man, what a challenge, right? To keep the main thing, to help continue to help people to actually grow, right?
Isn't that amazing? Surprise, surprise.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great challenge for all of us today, as we're serving in our churches and these elements and helping leaders, to actually be moving forward and not just checking the boxes, so to speak. This has been incredible. Something that we like to do to kind of wrap things up is we always do a rapid fire final five. And if you're up to the challenge, I've got a couple of last questions for you, but we'll just go.
I am, but I may have to pause just for a minute. So go ahead. I'm ready for it.
Okay. All right. Well, no problem. The first one is just, what is one book that you would recommend to church leaders?
I just listed 50 on my website.
You got to pick just one.
All right, just one. Here it is. It's The Making of a Leader by Edwin Friedman.
Okay, awesome. And now I need to get that link from you for those 50 recommendations. That'd be awesome. What is something that you listened to last, whether that's music or an audiobook? It doesn't matter. Podcast.
I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and then if I really get engaged, I then read them. One that you might, again, you think I'm a little strange, but one is called The End of Average by Todd Rose. It's a non-Christian book again, but he talks about how, and this applies to the church dramatically, how in our whole world, educationally and work, we designed everything for average, and yet there is no such thing as an average person anymore. And so we should really be about helping people understand their uniquenesses and help them grow in their unique areas rather than just trying to make them an average Christian and, make them just bland.
So it sounds like I'm going to check out the audio version of this first.
Yeah, sorry. I listened to it first. And then
I listened to a lot of audiobooks as well. So I'll definitely check that out. What would you say is your favorite piece of technology or software these days?
Well, when I left my church plant, they called me Pastor Gadget. So I've always been a techno kind of guy. But and I thought that was a compliment. My wife told me they were making fun of me. But anyways, most recently, I would suggest it is I use an AI note taker for all my meetings, because all my clients are dispersed around the nation, world, and so. But I use an AI. The one I happen to choose is Fathom, and it's very inexpensive, $144 a year. And yet it is so good. It not only records all the messages or all the meetings, video wise, but it also gives me a great summary. It gives me everything I committed to, everything that the other person is committed to. It's just really good stuff.
That is and tell us the name of that one more time.
Fathom. Fathom. Fathom.
No, that's awesome. And I'm sure that'll be really beneficial to some pastors out there, some leaders out there. What would you say is a quote or some advice that has kind of stuck with you over the years?
Just make peace with reality and move on. My mentor told me that. Well, can I give you two? That's one.
Sure. Yeah.
He told me that because so often I would want to change things that I had done wrong or whatever. He just said, make peace with reality and move on. That was the first one. And then the other one, he says, a leader is one step ahead of people. A martyr is 7 steps ahead. And he followed up to say, Greg, you're more often a martyr than you are a leader. And I think so often leaders develop a martyr complex because they're so far ahead of people. They haven't brought people along with them on the journey. So,
wow. What a challenge. Very challenging. Final one is just, what is one thing that you would like to communicate to our audience of church leaders today?
That you are fearfully and wonderfully made. And God has created you in such a unique way that he has things that only you can do, not to make you feel guilty, but I want you to feel special. But there are things that only you can do, and you'll be able to do them as you're able to understand the uniquenesses that he's built into you.
That's so good. Greg, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation today. What's the best way if people want to find out more about you or maybe learn about your assessments and tools that you've created? What's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Healthy Growing Leaders is our website, gregwiens.com. You can see my name spelled appropriately, and it's just gregwiens.com. That's actually my blog is there. It's just Greg at healthygrowingleaders.com is probably the easiest way. But
no, that's awesome.
Any of those ways.
That's
I have
great.
10 emails,
well,
but that's probably the easiest.
Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation today. I had a lot of fun. I hope you did. And
Ken, this is fun.
This is great. So thank you very much. And to everyone who is listening or watching along today, thank you for being a part of this conversation with us. And I hope that it's been beneficial to you. I would just ask this from you. If you did get some value out of this, would you help us get the word out about this to some other people? Maybe you have a friend who's in ministry as well, or a leader that would benefit from hearing this conversation today. Send them the link, share it with them. Also, you can always follow us follow our podcast, leave a review. Let us know what you think about this. If you're watching on YouTube, definitely hit that subscribe button so that you'll know the next time that we put out a video. But thank you so much for being with us today, Greg. Thank you to everyone who's listening, and we will see you right back here next time on Church Leadership Lab.
This episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast is brought to you by Ministry Brands, the largest provider of church technology software. Over 90,000 churches rely on Ministry Brands for their single platform solution that brings together all the digital tools a church needs. From online giving to websites to church management software and more, Ministry Brands is leading the way in simple-to-use, innovative solutions, all with the goal of empowering healthy churches. To learn more, visit ministrybrands.com.